This edition of Mac Voices is brought to you by MacPaw, the makers of CleanMyMac X. Your Mac as good as new. Find out more at macpaw.com/podcast. Welcome to Mac Voices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, I don't know about you, but I enjoy reading. I don't get enough time to do it, and so I often turn to audiobooks. The trouble with audiobooks, though, is that not every book I want to read. In fact, unfortunately, most of the books I seem to be interested in are not in audiobook form, but they are in ebook form. And that's why I have turned to VoiceStream as my preferred ebook reader. And I'm happy to welcome for this first time on Mac Voices, Winston Chen, the iOS developer and founder for VoiceStream. Winston, welcome. It's great to have you.
Well, thanks so much for inviting me.
Well, I'm delighted to have you here because I love to talk to the people who are behind the apps that I use. And I've been using VoiceStream for a while now. I had tried a couple of the ebook reader apps, and they just kind of never had the feature set that I was looking for. And when I found VoiceStream, I was overjoyed because it had everything I wanted and more.
Yeah. I mean, the application has really evolved. It went into the App Store 9 years ago. So I don't know when you started using it. But if you haven't used it for a long time, you probably have observed how the product has evolved over these last years.
I have, and that's one of the reasons that I was anxious to have you on the show because at first it was okay. This has the main feature set that I want, and each iteration it just gets a little better, offers a few more features and options, and so I guess I use it as an ebook to audio converter, not because I need to, but because I want to. But I also see you, I guess, posturing it as an accessibility app as well as just a book reader.
Right. And if you don't mind, maybe I should be helpful. Some of the listeners may not know about the origin of this product.
No, please, I'd love to know because I don't know the
Yeah.
origin.
Yeah, so this would be 10 years ago. Gosh, that's really, time really flies. So 10 years ago, I was working at a sort of late stage startup, getting a bit unhappy, a little bit disillusioned about what I was doing. So I decided that I was going to take a year off. And so my wife and I, our two young children, we decided we're going to go and live on a small island in Norway, just north of the Arctic Circle for a year. So that was going to be my sabbatical, taking time off to, figure out what I wanted to do. And for my kids, it was a chance for them to learn Norwegian. My wife is from Norway. Just the whole decision was made pretty quickly. And then next thing we knew, we're on the island. I was having a great time, hiking, fishing, learning how to smoke salmon, learning how to salt salmon, how to dry fish. But being, a technology person, of course, I wanted to explore different ideas and figuring out what I wanted to do when I do come back to Boston. So when the Arctic winter came, I started to spend a lot more time indoors. Most days it would get dark around 3 o'clock, especially when November hit. So I really needed something to focus my mind. So I thought, well, why don't I get back into software development? Something that I did a while back, but then I stopped doing for a while. And I thought I would just write myself an app. Because I've been hearing this, iPhones are going to be huge. Because 10 years ago, it was popular, but not nearly as much as they are today. And I had a bunch of ideas, and sort of almost arbitrarily, I picked this one idea about listening to text. Either I was a big user of Instapaper. Some people might know, when you find an article online that you want to that you want to listen, you want to read, but you don't have time to do it when you find it. So you say, I'm going to save this bookmark. And then later on, when you're on an airplane or something, you can download those articles ahead of time and read them at your leisure. Another thing I always had to read were our PDF documents. I read a lot of white papers. So that was sort of my idea, is that now we have these nifty little computers in your pocket. The screens are small, but if you're going to listen to it, it doesn't matter. So they're really ideal for any kind of audio use cases. And if you have these web articles and PDF files and you want to listen to, then you need to turn to text to speech to convert the text and render them into sound, so you can put on your headphones and listen to them. So that was sort of very, very simple idea that I had and wanted to experiment with. And I honestly did not think that it was going to turn into a product or a company. It was more like, let's write this thing and learn something and maybe have some fun. So it took me about 2 months, I say 3 months to write the app. A lot to learn, steep learning curve, but it was a simple product, so it didn't take a lot of time to write. Around February, the app went into the App Store, so that's February 2011. 2011, so that was 9 years ago. And back in those days, every new app in the App Store gets your time in the sun. There's a section called new apps. It doesn't matter whether you're one developer who spent 2 months writing it, where if you're Microsoft writing a huge app, everybody gets your time in this what's new section. So people started to download it. Very little, 4 or 5, but people found it because it was visible. And then I thought, well, that was a lot of fun. Time to move on maybe to some other things. But what really got me excited, this is why when you talk about accessibility, what really got me excited about this product was when a teacher wrote me and told me about how a student he had with dyslexia was using my app. And he said the student is really good at math. He if he understands a problem, he knows the answer, but he had a reading difficulty. So this math teacher would load up the math exam on an iPad with VoiceStream Reader running, and then he would give the iPad to the student, and then the student would listen to the questions and write down the right answers. Presumably, since he's good at math. And I thought, wow, that's incredible. I never thought that this product would be used in that way. And my wife being an educator, and also me being in technology, you always talk about you work on products that make a difference to the world. And here's a real thing. Look, my product is making a real difference in this kid's life. This kid the teacher used to have to, drag him to the corner of a room and read the exam out loud for him. And now he feels he's in control. And he's not, people aren't looking at him like he's so different. And that was very compelling for me. So I just kept on working on it. And later on, I discovered that a lot of blind people also, obviously, it should have been obvious from the beginning that text-to-speech is useful for people who are blind or people who have low vision. So over time, I have always, with this product, the way the product evolved, I've always kept those 3 audiences in mind. One is, people who are neither blind or dyslexic, you will call them neurotypical people. And then you have students who are dyslexic because they need to do a lot of reading. And third group are the people who are visually impaired. The first group, which sounds like you fall into that category, are the people who just, for whatever reason, you prefer to listen, or you want to be productive. You want to listen to something when you're exercising, or you're driving, um, and when in situations where you can't read by sight. And then you have people who are dyslexic, and you have people who are visual, and what they visually impaired, and what they have in common is that they all require text to be rendered into audio. Um, so that's a sort of little long-winded way to uh, to 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 talk about the origin of Voice Dream Reader.
I love the fact that it was almost not a whim, but just a personal project you put together and we're going to put off to the side, and then something like that story motivated you to keep on going and improving it. And I can only imagine what that must feel like to think that your product made that much difference in the life of one student, and then it's just a matter of other teachers finding it and using it for their students.
Right, right, yeah, and it was, and it turned out that from a business perspective, that was a good thing, because I never spent much marketing this product. It's all word of mouth, um, and it's, I didn't take any outside investment, and because the two groups that I really wanted to help, the people who are visually impaired and the special ed, user community, both are very, very tight and very strong in self-referencing. So one person knows about a product that's good and helpful, would tell everybody else they know about it. So word of mouth is able to sustain um, the product in those two markets.
How did the evolution of the voices that Apple makes available to you affect VoiceStream? As
Hmm.
far, I mean, what did you start out with? Because I can't say that I go back 10 years. I'm sorry. Um, my best guess would be that I probably found it maybe 5 years ago, something like that. But how did that evolution affect how you developed VoiceStream?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because when the first version of the product did not have Apple Voices. iPhones had built-in text to speech for, from a very early from a very early age, um, because Apple put so much emphasis on accessibility, and in order to make their products accessible, you have to have built-in text to speech. But the voices were not accessible to developers. So they're what's called private APIs, and developers can use them, but if your app is caught using them, not only will you not get approved, you could also get kicked out of the App Store. So when I wrote the first version, I realized that that in order to use these voices on the phone, I would be violating Apple rules. So I actually contemplated making the app available only for jailbroken phones. And I remember submitting the app to the jailbreaking, sort of store, if you will, and the guy who runs it tested the app, and he says, "Well, the app is really good, and I really like it. But are you sure you want to sign up for this? Because if you sign up for this, the Apple rules are that they may never accept you as an app in the App Store. So if you ever want to make money from this, you might not want to do this." So he actually talked me out of it. Um, so I had to look for a second option, and back then, Acapella was the only company. It's a company based in Sweden and in France. I think now it's mostly in France. It was the only company that made text to speech voices. for the iPhone back then. But there were, of course, I had to pay for every time a user downloads one of their voices, which is why the first version I was going to put it in the App Store for free. In the end, I had to put it, I had to price it at $2 because Acapella, required that my apps had to be paid, and there's a royalty that go to the Acapella. So when the app first came out, the only voice that was available was Heather from Acapella. In fact, you didn't have a choice. That's it. But then over time, I started adding other voices from NeoSpeech, voices from Ivona, which is now owned by Amazon. And then at some point, I forget which version of iOS, I think it's maybe iOS 6 or 7, when Apple finally made the built-in text-to-speech voices available to developers officially, and those are voices you see. Samantha, right? That's an iOS built-in voice, and they have voices for in lots of different languages, which is wonderful because now you have all these voices that you can choose for free. They're just there on the iPhone. We don't have to essentially resell voices developed by another company. And then when Siri came out, some even higher quality voices became available, like Aaron. Aaron is a Siri voice, although Apple hasn't made the full quality Siri voices available yet to developers, but I suspect someday they will. So yes, so Apple's voices, these built-in voices, I can say that they have made the product better, just because all of a sudden you have a choice. You have so many choices that are free.
This edition of MacVoices is supported by MacPaw, the makers of CleanMyMac X. Have you upgraded to macOS Catalina? Then you need CleanMyMac X. There are almost certainly files left over from your previous system that don't need to be there. CleanMyMac X can find them, let you know what they are and where they are, and help you get rid of them. If you haven't upgraded to Catalina, you need CleanMyMac X. It will help you optimize your Mac to run at its best, and when you are ready to upgrade, none of those old useless files will be transitioned over. In fact, whatever system your Mac is running or whatever Mac you're running, CleanMyMac X will help you get it running at its best and keep it running at its best. Get rid of all those outdated cache files, logs, and old email attachments. And don't worry, CleanMyMac X won't delete anything without you knowing about it and without your permission. Find out how it works by downloading your free trial of CleanMyMac X from macpaw.com/podcast. That's macpaw.com/podcast, macpaw.com/podcast for your free trial of CleanMyMac X. Give your Mac a performance upgrade with CleanMyMac X at macpaw.com/podcast. Thanks to MacPaw for their support of MacVoices. This may not be fair to ask, but I'll ask anyway, just out of curiosity. Do you know, is there a most popular voice or voices, or is it just sort of all over the board?
Well, there are popular voices, but they're not as the preferences are more diffused than you might think, and that's because one reason for having a lot of voices is important for people who are blind and students who are dyslexic, because they spend a lot of time in the product listening. This is their, if you're blind, this is your main way to consume digital content. And if you're a student, you're reading all the time. And so to have a personal affinity toward the voice is important. I remember, hearing there's a British voice called Rachel, and it's not the most popular voice, but one day a user in Britain wrote me and it says, "I really liked Rachel. because she sounded like my elementary school teacher. So, okay, well, that's one way to choose a voice. But yeah, so there are definitely personal affinities towards some of these voices.
I know, as someone who has listened to a lot of ebooks now through VoiceStream, you have to get used to certain mispronunciations, and not as in, completely missing the word, but it just, because it is computer generated, it's not always exactly what it should be. And so
Right.
once you do that, your brain sort of just takes over and says, oh, okay, that's a little hiccup, but it doesn't detract from it. And I know that was one of the first things I noticed about this, because having a human read an audiobook is great, but it also, first of all, the audiobooks are quite a bit more expensive, and the selection is a lot more limited. With this, as long as something is, if I can get it into text, as you said, PDF, or if it's available through any of the popular book formats, and I can get it into VoiceStream, then it just takes over and does its thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's, interesting you mentioned that about tolerating uh, mispronunciations. And I think this is one reason I put a lot of emphasis on the accessibility space. And by the way, so, this Thursday is the Global Accessibility Awareness Day, May 21st to the third Thursday every May. And Apple is doing a story on VoiceStream this time in the Today section. So yeah, I don't know when this will be aired. So you can look for that. So it put a lot of emphasis on accessibility because people who are who rely on this, they're able to tolerate some of the imperfections of text to speech, whereas neurotypical people are less willing to tolerate those mistakes. But one interesting thing, like I had so many conversations I've had with people who are severely dyslexic, and were people who are blind. They who read a lot. They always read at a very high speed. Sometimes going to like 800 words a minute, which is about 3 to 4 times your sort of the speed of human speech. And some people even ask, can this go even faster? That's like, when you listen to something at 800 words a minute, it's to me, that's totally incomprehensible. It's like gibberish. But people have trained themselves to listen to speech that fast. But an interesting thing happens. I remember this gentleman that I talked to, who's dyslexic, and he described to me that the experience of listening, for him to listen to text at 800 words a minute. He said, I no longer the human voice. I no longer recognize the human voice in it. It's almost like I've got information directly jacking into my brain. So it's almost like, it's almost for him, that what's important to a text to speech voice is not how natural it is or how human like it is. It is how it's able to convey text to his brain in the most clear way at high speed. That was what mattered to him. And a lot of blind people have also a lot of blind people have expressed the same idea to me. So you mentioned that, like, right, so because mispronunciations, you don't even care anymore because your brain recognizes that.
Yeah, we've had some accessibility discussions here on MacVoices, and I've seen some demos of visually challenged people using screen readers, and it's it's kind of amazing what, I like to think that I can usually do two and a half, once in a while, depending on the voice, three times, and stay
Mm.
with it. But some of these folks have just gotten so far beyond me, and that's interesting that they express it as just being jacked directly into their brain, as opposed to
Yeah.
having somebody read to them.
Right, right, right. It's just like consuming text through sound. That's all it is. In fact, some people said, "I don't want this voice." Right, does it come down to sort of preferences? Some voices are more natural than others, but some people don't want naturalness. They want the voices that can speed up well.
And the idea that again, I'm comparing this with audiobooks, because audiobooks are more of a performance. Even if the actor, the reader, is not trying to use different voices or add intonation, it still is a bit of a performance. With this, it's just text to speech. And in some ways, I kind of like that better, because it's allowing me to put the color into if it's a novel, for example. I'm kind of coloring the novel myself in my head, as opposed to someone performing it and trying to influence my reaction to the story.
Yeah, right, right, right. This is a lot of reason why most people, for the most part, people like books more than the movie adaptations of those books, right? Especially if you read the book first, um, because you're able to use your imagination. And again, the same thing. If you can get, if you start accepting text to speech as a text delivery mechanism into your brain, then that experience becomes much more similar to reading, to right, as opposed to listening to somebody, like you said, like listening to somebody reading to you.
You were much more eloquent stating it than I was. It feels much more like reading, as opposed to listening. And folks, if you do audiobooks, and if you do ebooks through something like VoiceStream, I hope you know what I mean, because there are two different experiences, and it almost depends on the work as to whether I prefer one or the other. But I have to say that preference is not large in any direction, because I find I'm just as satisfied 98% of the time with an ebook as I am with an audiobook.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure, if you're the exception or the rule, but I think in general, you're probably more the exception than the rule, where most people do prefer the natural sounding voices. But I would also say that if you just allow yourself to accept it and embrace it, I think many people might find it as beneficial as you have.
And you have to give it a little time. I mean, I think we're
Right,
all we're
right.
all impatient. We all want it to be
Mm.
just exactly the way, and we want to be really proficient with it. And it's almost like learning an application to sort of a strange degree, that you're not going to get the most out of it until you give it a little bit of time and do a little practice. And do this practice at the 1.0 speed. Maybe even slow it down if you find it necessary. But then, you can work your way up to normal and maybe up to speed. And along the way, you start to learn those mispronunciations, and you skip over those, and it becomes a very pleasant experience.
Yeah, I did an experiment with a professor at MIT, and we had subjects, students, and the result, and there was a Scientific American article that he published, and the result is maybe perhaps a little surprising for for everyone, is that almost everyone every subject, whether they're dyslexic or not, um, can read, can listen to text at twice the speed as normal speech. Right? So normal speech is around 200 words a minute, something like 220. So, and most people can listen to text at 400, double that speed. And here's the kicker is that, and most people are able to do that with no loss of comprehension. A lot of speed reading techniques do have loss of comprehension. There's this technique called RSVP, when the word flashes, one at a time, right in front of you, and that's a very old technique. It's not a new invention. But in the education community, research has shown that when you speed up, that you feel like you're reading, but in fact your comprehension is reduced by a lot as you turn up the speed. But with text to speech, like I said, you can double the speed with no loss of comprehension.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that, and I've taken some speed reading courses to try to in college and to try to obviously get through a lot more material. And at that point, this kind of technology wasn't available to us, and that was always one of the big focuses. Is okay, you read through it that fast, but did you really comprehend it? And a lot of the time, the answer was no. You'd missed maybe not the finer points, but maybe you'd missed some big ideas too. And here, I don't find that I feel like I miss anything. And again, speaking just from my personal experience, at 2x, I don't miss anything. And I feel like, in fact, there are times that, but here's the other interesting thing. If I listen to something at 2x speed, you would think that I would get tired or get bored by a conversation like this at normal speed. And they're two different things. It's like my brain adjusts without any problem at all.
Yeah. I think, what you read matters, right? If you're reading, I'm sure if you're reading, James Joyce, you might not want to read that at, 2x. I can't even understand it at 1x. But if let's say if you're reading, news, see an article on CNN.com, you can certainly read it at a faster speed with no loss of comprehension. And I know a lot of students read academic papers using VoiceStream. Harvard Business School, I think in their intro, somebody told me that in their intro packet, they said, go download VoiceStream Reader, because just they have such massive amount of reading, including cases, but again, that they may not, you may not want to listen to those things at high speed. So it does depend on the content, I guess.
Yeah, but just the idea. I mean, I know I'm guilty of just. There's so many things I want to read that I just never get around to, don't have the time. And VoiceStream Reader has allowed me to do some of that recreational reading, if you will, while I'm doing the laundry or doing yard work or, out for a walk or something. So I don't feel like I hate to say wasting time, but I feel like I'm being more productive. And getting to do something I wouldn't get to otherwise do.
Right.
That wraps up the first part of our discussion with Winston Chen of VoiceStream about VoiceStream Reader. Next time, we'll get into some of the geekier side of the app and what's going on under the hood and how it has developed over time. That's on the next edition of MacVoices. Until then, I'm Chuck Joyner. Thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you Mac Voices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.